Imagine a time when justice wasn't just about law, but about making an example of anyone who defied the empire. The Ottoman Empire, with its grandeur and power, left a chilling legacy of brutal punishment methods that go beyond anything we can imagine today. In the world of the Ottoman Empire, punishment was not just about retribution, but a means to maintain control and instill fear. The punishment methods used during its reign were terrifying and designed to deter rebellion and uphold authority. Eye gouging, a gruesome and horrifying act, was reserved for those who betrayed the state. This brutal practice was meant to strip the accused of their ability to see and participate in the world, leaving them powerless both literally and symbolically. Imagine the terror of being publicly restrained and then having your sight taken away, your very ability to experience the world reduced to darkness. For many, the loss of sight was far worse than death itself. But eye gouging was just the beginning. Beheading, another common form of execution, became a public spectacle. The Ottoman Empire used beheadings not only to execute criminals, but to send a message to everyone in the empire. It wasn't just about eliminating a threat. It was about making sure others saw the punishment and understood the price of disobedience. In some of the most significant executions, like that of the rebel leader Rashid al-Malik, the heads of those condemned were displayed as trophies meant to demoralize enemies and reinforce the absolute power of the Sultan. Then there was Falaka, a corporal punishment that may seem less brutal at first glance but was equally devastating. Beating the soles of the feet, often with a rod, might not leave visible scars, but it caused intense pain and suffering that could leave the victim unable to walk for days. This was a punishment often carried out in public, used to instill discipline and remind people of their place in the empire's hierarchy. As we explore the horrific punishments that were common in the Ottoman Empire, we also see how they reflect the broader theme of control, fear, and societal order. The severity of these punishments was not just meant to inflict pain, but to reinforce power, to show the world that defiance would be met with swift and brutal consequences. These punishments were about sending a message, punishing the body, and breaking the spirit, ensuring that rebellion and disobedience would be crushed before they could ever begin. In the Ottoman Empire, punishment was not just about meting out justice. It was about sending a chilling message to everyone within its vast territories. The methods used by the empire were as brutal as they were effective, designed to instill fear and ensure obedience. One of the most terrifying punishments employed was eye gouging. This gruesome act was often reserved for those who betrayed the state, especially traitors and rebels. It wasn't merely about incapacitating the individual. It was about stripping them of their ability to see, to participate in society, and to live with dignity. Eye gouging was performed in public, ensuring that everyone could witness the punishment and understand the consequences of crossing the empire. The loss of sight was seen as a fate worse than death by many, amplifying the severity of the punishment. Those who underwent this horrific process were left not only physically maimed, but psychologically shattered, unable to live as they once had. This method was a public warning, a constant reminder of the power the Ottoman rulers held. Beheadings were another common form of punishment in the Ottoman Empire, widely used for crimes seen as serious threats to the state. The efficiency of beheading emphasized the absolute power of the Sultan and the state's ability to enforce its laws with speed and finality. Public beheadings were often witnessed by large crowds, designed not only to punish the individual, but also to send a powerful message to the public. One of the most significant beheadings was that of Rashid al-Malik, a rebel leader who challenged the Sultan's authority. His execution served as a brutal reminder that any challenge to the empire would be met with swift and severe retribution. The public nature of these executions reinforced the Sultan's power and instilled fear among the people, making it clear that any threat to the state would be crushed without mercy. But the Ottoman punishments didn't end with beheadings or eye gouging. The falaka or foot beating was another method used to maintain control, particularly in military and disciplinary contexts. The pain inflicted by the falaka was excruciating, though it left no visible scars. This made it an effective punishment for those whose crimes were considered serious but not necessarily deserving of execution. By targeting the victim's feet, this method rendered them incapable of walking properly for days, symbolizing the physical and social consequences of defying the empire. These punishments were not just about justice, they were tools of control, a means to maintain order in a vast and diverse empire. They showed how the Ottomans used brutality to send a message, shaping the lives of their people and reinforcing their rule. Each act of punishment was carefully designed to strip the victim of their dignity, reminding the public that rebellion would never be tolerated. In this way, the Ottoman Empire established its authority and instilled fear in all who lived within its borders. The Ottoman Empire's approach to justice was harsh, marked by brutal punishments that went beyond the law itself, becoming tools of fear and control. One of the most widely used forms of execution was beheading, which was not only swift but also public serving. Multiple purposes: retribution, deterrence, and a reminder of the Sultan's absolute power. Beheadings performed in broad daylight were meant to send a clear message to the people that disobedience to the empire would be met with swift and unforgiving punishment. The public spectacle surrounding the executions was designed to reinforce the empire's dominance and terrorize anyone who might consider challenging the rule of the Sultan. A particularly significant execution was that of Rashid al-Malik, a rebel leader whose challenge to the empire was met with the severing of his head. His execution, like so many others, was carried out with efficiency, not only eliminating the individual but also reminding the public of the cost of rebellion. However, beheading was not the only form of punishment the Ottomans used to maintain order. Falaka, a corporal punishment involving the beating of the soles of the feet, was another prevalent method, especially in the military and among the lower classes. The falaka was particularly cruel because it inflicted intense pain without leaving any visible scars. Its purpose was twofold: to physically break the individual's ability to walk and to serve as a public reminder of the consequences of defying the Ottoman authorities. This punishment was often carried out in public, ensuring that the pain and humiliation were witnessed by many, reinforcing the idea that lawbreakers would be humiliated and punished for their actions. In addition to these more common punishments, the Ottoman Empire also employed extremely severe methods like emasculation and impalement for those who committed particularly heinous crimes. Emasculation was not only a physical punishment, but also a psychological one. It stripped the victim of their masculinity, rendering them powerless in a deeply patriarchal society. It was often used for political retribution, signaling the fall of powerful men. Impalement, on the other hand, was one of the most gruesome and painful punishments in the Ottoman Empire. A sharp stake would be driven through the victim's body, causing excruciating pain and a slow, agonizing death. This method, reserved for the most dangerous criminals or enemies of the state, was used as a tool of terror to suppress any form of resistance. The punishment methods employed by the Ottoman Empire were not only intended to serve justice, but were designed to instill fear across the population. Each act of cruelty had a clear purpose: to reinforce the Sultan's control, to humiliate and break the spirit of those who dared challenge the empire, and to remind everyone of the harsh consequences of defying the law. These brutal punishments left a legacy of fear, illustrating the extent to which the Ottomans would go to maintain their absolute rule. The Ottoman Empire, known for its power and cultural achievements, was equally notorious for its brutal and inhumane methods of punishment. These punishments were not only meant to enforce the law, but also to instill fear and ensure the stability of the empire. One of the most common forms of punishment was beheading. Reserved for those seen as a significant threat to the state, beheadings were swift and often carried out publicly, emphasizing the empire's efficiency in executing justice. The purpose was twofold: to eliminate the threat and to send a clear message to the public about the consequences of defying the empire. These executions were often witnessed by large crowds, and the display of the severed heads served as a grim reminder of the Sultan's absolute power. In addition to executions, the Falaka foot beating was a corporal punishment often used to discipline soldiers, slaves, and even students. While it may seem less severe compared to other forms of punishment, the pain inflicted by the Falaka was excruciating, and it could leave the victim incapable of walking for days. This punishment was frequently administered in public settings, further amplifying its humiliating effect. The Falaka was a reminder to those who witnessed it of the power of the empire and the consequences of stepping out of line. Hanging was another common form of execution used for crimes such as murder, theft, and rebellion. The public nature of these executions reinforced the power of the state and acted as a stark deterrent to anyone considering similar actions. Some hangings were more gruesome, using hooks or poles, adding a level of cruelty to an already terrifying form of punishment. Like beheadings, hanging served not only as a form of justice, but also as a tool to reinforce authority and control. However, some punishments were even more severe and designed to break the spirit of the offender: amputation. Particularly, the removal of hands or feet was reserved for thieves and those who rebelled against the empire. The act of amputation served both a physical and symbolic purpose. It permanently disabled the individual, preventing them from committing further crimes, and it humiliated them in front of the public, reminding all of the consequences of defying the law. Similarly, emasculation was used to punish men for political crimes or sexual offenses. This act not only stripped the individual of their physical power, but also destroyed their social standing, leaving them powerless in a patriarchal society. The brutality of these punishments was not just for the sake of justice, it was about control. The Ottoman Empire used fear and terror as tools to maintain authority over its vast territories. Each method was designed to send a message: break the law, defy the Sultan, and face a punishment that would break not just your body, but your spirit as well. These punishments left deep scars in the empire, serving as reminders of the cost of rebellion and the absolute power wielded by the state. The Ottoman Empire, with its immense power and vast territories, wielded not only military might, but also a terrifying system of justice that instilled fear in the hearts of its people. The methods of punishment were brutally effective, leaving a lasting impact on those who dared defy the empire's authority. One of the most horrifying of these punishments was beheading, a swift and public act meant to eliminate threats and send a clear message to the rest of the population. To witness the severing of a head was to see the full extent of the empire's control, to understand that no one, no matter their status or importance, was exempt from the empire's reach. For those who rebelled against the Ottoman order, the cost of defiance was not just death, but a public spectacle that reinforced the might of the state. But for some, the punishment was not as swift as beheading the Falaka. The brutal beating of the soles of the feet was a punishment designed to cause excruciating pain, yet leave no permanent marks. The victim would be humiliated publicly, degraded, and left suffering in agony, unable to walk for days. This punishment was a reminder to all who witnessed it. The empire's authority was unyielding, and any act of defiance would be met with swift and humiliating retribution. Those who suffered the Falaka were not just punished for their actions, they were made an example, their pain a symbol of the empire's power to crush any form of resistance. Perhaps even more chilling were the public executions, such as hanging, where the condemned were left to hang as a stark reminder of the consequences of criminal behavior. In some cases, the Ottomans employed methods of hanging that added even more gruesome brutality. Hooks and poles, leaving the victim to die in an agonizing display of cruelty. These public spectacles were not just acts of justice, they were about asserting dominance. They reminded the population that the empire's grip was absolute, and any rebellion, no matter how small, would be met with violent retribution. And then there were the punishments that stripped individuals of their dignity and humanity. Amputation was a fate reserved for thieves and rebels, a method that not only disabled the individual physically, but also humiliated them in front of the public. For many, this was a punishment worse than death, a life marked forever by the loss of a hand or foot. In the case of emasculation, the pain was not just physical, but deeply psychological. It was an attack on a man's very identity, stripping him of his power, his social standing, and his ability to reproduce, leaving him in a state of utter humiliation. These punishments were not just acts of law enforcement, they were tools of control used to maintain the power of the Sultan and suppress any challenges to his authority. The Ottoman Empire was ruthless in its efforts to ensure order, and in doing so, it left behind a legacy of fear and suffering. The brutality of these punishments, carried out in public and witnessed by many, sent a powerful message: defy the empire, and you would not just face death, but a lifetime of suffering and degradation. This harsh system of justice ensured that rebellion was not only punished but also erased from memory, leaving no trace of those who dared to challenge the empire's iron grip. The echoes of this terror still resonate today, reminding us of the deep price that was paid for disobedience in one of history's most formidable empires. The Ottoman Empire was a world where power was absolute, and its rulers ruled with a terrifying mix of brutality and fear.
It was a time when the slightest defiance could cost a person everything: life, dignity, and even identity. The methods of punishment employed by the empire were cruel, designed not only to punish, but to break the spirit and leave a permanent mark on the soul. Among the most horrifying of these methods was impalement, a punishment so gruesome it became infamous in history.
A sharpened stake was driven through the victim's body, often starting at the rectum and exiting through the chest or mouth, leaving them to suffer in excruciating pain, sometimes for hours or even days. This was not just a method of execution. It was an act of terror meant to make an example out of the condemned. The horror of impalement left a lasting impression on anyone who witnessed it, solidifying the empire's dominance through the sheer brutality of its power.
For those who didn't face such a slow and agonizing death, there was the threat of emasculation, a punishment that attacked not only the body, but the very core of a man's identity. In a society as deeply patriarchal as the Ottoman Empire, emasculation stripped the individual of his power, his social standing, and his very essence. It was a punishment that left the victim broken, powerless, and humiliated in a way that was as much psychological as it was physical.
It served as a warning that no one, not even the mightiest men, were exempt from the empire's authority. The sheer cruelty of this punishment left scars that could never heal, a constant reminder of the harshness of the empire's justice system. In addition to these extreme forms of punishment, the Falaka, or foot beating, was another method used to humiliate and weaken the offender. Although it didn't leave visible scars, the pain of having one's feet beaten with a rod was intense, often rendering the victim unable to walk for days. It was a punishment that humiliated the victim in front of the public, forcing them to endure both physical agony and social degradation. It was a public spectacle that reinforced the empire's power, reminding everyone that disobedience would be met with ruthless consequences. These punishments, whether they were public executions, mutilations, or torturous beatings, were not just about justice. They were about maintaining control and sending a chilling message to the people of the empire. Defy the Sultan, and you would not just lose your life. You would be made an example, erased from history, in the most brutal way possible. The terror of these punishments was not just in the pain they inflicted, but in the fear they spread throughout the empire. For centuries, these acts of cruelty ensured that the Sultan's grip on power remained unchallenged, with no room for rebellion, no space for defiance. The Ottoman Empire's legacy is a dark reminder of the lengths to which those in power will go to maintain control, and the terrible price paid by those who dared to oppose it. The Ottoman Empire, with its vast territories and unyielding power, is remembered not only for its cultural achievements, but for the terrifying methods it used to maintain control. In a world ruled by fear and authority, the empire's punishments were designed to break not just the bodies of its offenders, but their very spirits. Among the most brutal of these punishments was beheading, a swift and decisive act that sent a message to anyone who dared to challenge the empire's might. The public spectacle of beheading was not just about the end of a life, it was a reminder that defiance would be crushed with merciless finality. Those who faced the executioner's sword were paraded before crowds. Their death, a grim display of power meant to instill fear in all who watched. The heads of the condemned were sometimes displayed as trophies, reinforcing the idea that no one was beyond the reach of the Sultan's iron grip. The public nature of these executions made them an act of terror, a warning that rebellion or disobedience would result in swift and violent retribution. But the terror didn't end with beheadings. The Falaka, a punishment that involved beating the soles of the feet, was used to humiliate and control offenders in a way that left no visible scars, yet inflicted intense pain. The Falaka was not just a physical punishment, it was a humiliation, a public act meant to degrade and strip the victim of their dignity. The pain was excruciating, rendering the victim unable to walk for days, a constant reminder of the empire's authority. Publicly executed, their suffering was witnessed by many, reinforcing the power of the Ottoman state. Each blow was a reminder that those who defied the empire would face not only physical pain, but the loss of their humanity in the eyes of their fellow citizens. The empire also employed impalement, perhaps the most infamous of all its punishments. The victim was slowly and agonizingly impaled on a sharpened stake, their body subjected to hours, sometimes days of excruciating pain. This method wasn't just about execution, it was about terror. The Ottomans used impalement as a tool to suppress resistance, to send a message that any challenge to the empire would result in unimaginable suffering.
The agony endured by those subjected to impalement was designed not only to kill, but to instill fear in the hearts of others. It was an act that made an example out of the victim leaving their tortured body as a grim warning to anyone who might consider rebellion.
These punishments were not merely acts of justice, they were tools of control designed to ensure that no one dared challenge the absolute power of the Ottoman Empire. The brutality of these methods was not only physical, but psychological, stripping individuals of their dignity and humanity in front of an audience. Each punishment, whether it was a beheading, falaka, or impalement, served to remind the people of the empire who held the power. These acts of cruelty were not just about punishing criminals, they were about breaking the spirit of the people, ensuring that resistance was unthinkable, and that the Sultan's will remained unchallenged. The Ottoman Empire's legacy is one marked by fear control and the chilling reality of a world where those who defied the empire paid the ultimate price. The Ottoman Empire's brutal justice system serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which those in power will go to maintain control. One of the most infamous punishments used in this empire was impalement, a gruesome method that caused not only intense pain, but also left the victim to suffer in public view, sometimes for hours or even days. The act of impalement was meant to break the will of the condemned, showing the world just how ruthless the empire could be. The victim, often a rebel or someone who threatened the stability of the empire, would be slowly impaled with a sharpened stake, their body a living testament to the empire's absolute power. The cruel spectacle of impalement wasn't just a form of execution. It was a statement, an act designed to suppress resistance through sheer terror. The victim's prolonged suffering became a warning to anyone who might consider opposing the empire, ensuring that rebellion was met with brutal and inescapable consequences.
While impalement was a method reserved for the most heinous crimes, other forms of punishment were equally harsh and humiliating. Beheading was a common form of execution in the Ottoman Empire, executed swiftly to ensure that the offender could not become a symbol of resistance. The public nature of the beheadings meant that they were not just about punishing an individual. They were meant to instill fear in the hearts of the people.
The head of the condemned was often displayed as a grim trophy, reinforcing the authority of the Sultan and sending a clear message to anyone considering rebellion. This spectacle of public execution wasn't just a reminder of the empire's power, it was a tool used to break the spirit of its subjects.
Even those who did not face execution were not spared from the empire's oppressive justice system. The Falaka, a punishment involving the beating of the soles of the feet, was used to humiliate and physically break the individual without leaving permanent marks. Though it didn't leave visible scars, the pain was excruciating and would often leave the victim unable to walk for days. This punishment was carried out in public, ensuring that the victim's suffering was witnessed by others. The Falaka reinforced the idea that the empire's power was absolute and that any defiance, no matter how small, would be met with swift and severe punishment. These punishments weren't just about justice. They were a means to control and subdue the population. The Ottoman Empire used fear and humiliation as tools to maintain its iron grip on power. Each form of punishment was designed to break the spirit of the individual, to strip them of their humanity, and to serve as a warning to anyone who dared challenge the empire's rule.
The brutality of these methods ensured that rebellion was not only punished, but erased from memory, leaving the people in a state of constant fear and submission. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire's justice system is one of terror, where the price of defiance was not just death, but total destruction of body and soul. In the Ottoman Empire, punishment was more than just a legal consequence. It was a chilling tool of fear and control used to break the spirit of those who dared to defy the system.
Among the most infamous forms of punishment was emasculation, a brutal method designed to strip men of their very essence, both physically and psychologically. To be emasculated was to lose one's manhood, power, and social standing, reducing the victim to a state of utter helplessness. It wasn't just about physical harm. It was a psychological attack, an attempt to erase the victim's identity in a society where masculinity was a cornerstone of power.
The act was carried out with cruel precision, leaving the victim humiliated and broken, stripped of his dignity in the most intimate and profound way. But the empire's cruelty didn't stop there. For those who faced impalement, the punishment was equally horrific, if not worse. The victim was slowly and agonizingly impaled on a sharpened stake, a form of execution that could take hours or even days to kill. This method of punishment was designed not only to end the victim's life, but to instill terror in anyone who witnessed it.
Impalement was used to suppress resistance and send a powerful message that any challenge to the empire would be met with excruciating pain and suffering. The public nature of this execution method made it even more terrifying, as the condemned was displayed for all to see, suffering in a grotesque manner that ensured the empire's dominance would not be questioned.
For those who didn't face death, there were other forms of punishment that served to remind the people of the empire's absolute control. Falaka, the beating of the feet, was a common practice to punish soldiers, slaves, and anyone who defied the empire. The pain inflicted by Falaka was intense, often leaving the victim unable to walk for days. The most disturbing part was the humiliation. Being publicly beaten and left to suffer was a reminder that no one was above the empire's authority. The public nature of this punishment was designed to degrade and humiliate, to show the world that even the smallest act of disobedience would not be tolerated. These punishments were more than just methods of justice. They were mechanisms of control, tools to maintain an empire built on fear. The brutality and inhumanity of these punishments served to break the will of the people, ensuring that the Sultan's power remained unchallenged. They were meant to instill fear in every heart, to remind the subjects of the Ottoman Empire that disobedience would not just cost them their lives, it would strip them of their humanity, their dignity, and their identity. The legacy of these punishments is a reminder of the depths to which those in power will go to maintain control and silence any threat to their rule. The Ottoman Empire, an empire forged on power and control, left a legacy of brutality that still echoes through history. The punishments inflicted upon those who dared to defy the empire's laws were not merely acts of justice. They were tools of fear, humiliation, and terror, meant to crush any semblance of resistance and ensure the Sultan's absolute authority. Among the most chilling of these punishments was beheading, a swift and public execution that not only ended a life but served as a grotesque spectacle for the masses. The beheading wasn't just about eliminating a criminal. It was a public warning to anyone who might consider challenging the empire's power. The act was performed with terrifying efficiency, a clean stroke of the sword or axe, but the gruesome display of the body, often displayed as a symbol of defeat, sent a message far beyond the immediate punishment. It reminded the people that the empire was all-powerful, and any rebellion would be met with merciless force. For those who managed to escape the executioner's blade, there were other forms of punishment that were just as cruel, if not more so. Falaka, the brutal beating of the soles of the feet, was inflicted upon those who broke the law, humbling them in the most public and painful way. The victims' feet were beaten until they could no longer walk, leaving them physically broken and humiliated in front of crowds who gathered to witness the spectacle. This punishment left no visible scars, but the agony it caused was undeniable. The victim's humiliation was a powerful tool used to remind the people of their place within the empire, reinforcing the idea that disobedience would not be tolerated. Impalement, however, was perhaps the most terrifying of all the Ottoman punishments. A slow and agonizing death, it was reserved for the most heinous criminals or those who posed a threat to the empire's power. The condemned would be slowly and painfully impaled on a sharpened stake, a method that often left them to suffer for hours or even days. This gruesome display of pain was not only a punishment, it was a spectacle designed to instill fear in anyone who dared to defy the Sultan's rules. The public nature of impalement ensured that it became a symbol of the empire's terror, a reminder to the people that any act of resistance would result in unimaginable suffering. These punishments were not just about enforcing the law, they were about control. The Ottoman Empire used fear to maintain its dominance, reminding its people at every turn that the empire's power was absolute and unyielding. The brutality of these methods left scars that went beyond the body. They left deep psychological marks, ensuring that no one would dare to challenge the empire's authority. The legacy of these punishments is a haunting reminder of how deeply power can corrupt and how those in power will go to unimaginable lengths to keep it. As we reflect on the brutality of the Ottoman Empire's punishments, we are reminded of the devastating power of fear, control, and oppression. These punishments were not just about the crime itself, but about breaking the spirit of the people, erasing their dignity, and reinforcing the empire's absolute authority. Beheading, impalement, Falaka, and other forms of cruel retribution were methods to show that defiance would not be tolerated no matter the cost. But beyond the horror of these punishments, there is an important lesson to be learned, one about the cost of unchecked power and the resilience of those who dare to challenge it. The people who suffered under these brutal systems were not just victims of their crimes, but also of a system that used fear to maintain control. Their stories, though often forgotten or erased, serve as a reminder that true justice can never be built on violence, fear, or oppression. Today, as we look back at these painful chapters of history, we must remember that the true strength of a society lies not in its ability to punish, but in its capacity for compassion, fairness, and respect for human dignity. We must never forget the lessons these dark moments in history teach us: the importance of justice, equality, and the need to resist systems that seek to control through fear and intimidation. So as you watch this video, I encourage you to reflect on how far we've come, but also on how much work remains. Let's strive to build a world where power is wielded with compassion, and where every individual is treated with the dignity they deserve. That is the true lesson of history, the power of humanity over tyranny, and the importance of ensuring that such cruelty is never repeated. Thank you for watching, and may the lessons of the past guide us toward a more just and compassionate future.